I had the pleasure of taking a trip with the Honors College to the Tenement Museum in New York City. That day, I was excited to get out of my apartment and walk around with my fellow academic peers and get a more hands-on and interactive learning experience outside of my regular weekdays spent in lecture halls and study rooms. My group had booked tickets to observe the apartment of Joseph and Rachel Moore, a young black family living in Lower Manhattan in 1869. During the beginning of the tour, I recall sitting in a chair in the corner of this little room next to the coal hatch stove where the tenants used to stay. As my tour guide spoke to us about the segregated lives of waiters and porters, such as the Moors, he had pointed out a large glass case holding a multitude of items that were mailed by one of the Moors' distant descendants to the founder of the museum. In the case sat a small chain mail coin purse, a hair comb, a little magnifying glass, and most significantly, a miniature copy of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address and Shakespeare's Hamlet. Before I knew this woman's distant grandmother was a local librarian, I was a little intrigued at the idea of a black woman during this time carrying around a copy of Shakespeare as she went about daily excursions. I mean, it's a play written centuries ago by a European man whose language African Americans were intentionally barred from learning in hopes that they would not rebel against their oppressors. What makes this work so special? When people envision Shakespeare, they don't associate him with the idea of blackness. They probably think of plays and sonnets that fan at the ideas of early British imperialism and the cliches of love and romance. However, textual synthesis of Lincoln's principles about the equal rights of man and the turmoil faced during the Civil War seem to make such perfect sense when you think about the mental and physical limitations of freedom that Hamlet, Prince undergoes. How these texts tie into the struggles of Black people across the diaspora. Therefore, this experience made me think about the ways that our complex identities in the real world merge with the convoluted fiction of Shakespearean literature. My essay aims to examine Shakespeare's relationship to the Black identity and various racial others, focusing on Henry V, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and The Tempest. I argue that Shakespeare's work is relevant in furthering our understanding of race, imperialism, and how it all relates to the politics of literacy. Before I look at Shakespeare's work, it is important to understand the idea of race as it pertains to the early modern consciousness. Shakespeare's idea of race might not align completely with what mainstream audiences think of when we think about the word race. According to Heng, race can be seen as a structural relationship for the articulation and management of human differences rather than a substantive content. Race is understood as a body centered phenomenon. Additionally, Professor Andrew Hadfield adds that racial differences could be imagined in terms of genealogy and inheritance, or in terms of geographical distinctions which had determined identities. This is indicated in the artwork called The Adoration of Magi, which was painted around 1455. The artist decided to use a turban-like crown and a bushy dark beard and slightly darker skin color, which is not the focus, to indicate that one of the Magi came from Africa. This is closely related to the early beginnings of identity and ethnicity as it is closely seen in Shakespeare's Henry V. In the play, Henry's captains consist of the army of Gower the Englishman, Jamie the Scotsman, Morris the Irishman, and Fluellen the Welshman. These differences in national identity are best represented through genealogy and blood ties. During the play, Fluellen and Captain McMorris are seen having conflicts due to these differences. In Act 4, Fluellen identifies McMorris by his nation, and McMorris retorts, "Of my nation? What is my nation? Is a villain, and a bastard, and a knave, and a rascal? What is my nation? Who talks of my nation?" This showcases the stereotypical traits of an Anglo-Irishman getting angry and displaying a violent temperament, or the Welshman carrying around a leak. Whether this is comedic relief, there's a sense of miscommunication between the Welshmen, and they sort of cower at their own racial ignorance. McMorris's response is bastard, and he's referring to his identity as an Anglo-Irishman, someone of mixed race, who is affronted by what he thinks Llewellyn is drawing to attention of his lack of racial purity. This idea of nationality and race is further explored in A Midsummer Night's Dream with Titania's Indian boy. During the play, Titania is looking after her deceased friend's son, a changeling boy from India. He causes major conflicts between Titania and Oberon because she wants to protect and raise him separate from her lover's own wants. Titania feels maternal towards the boy, and which she got from a distant land. Oberon wants him to be a henchman and a knight. The child is thought to evoke this exotic like wonder out of Oberon and reflects Shakespeare's own evaluation of England during the 1600s as it pertains to English merchants and the Indian spice trade. Oberon wants to exploit the changeling boy, while Titania seeks to nurture him. Additionally, Bottom, the creature that Titania falls in love with thanks to the love potion, can represent the dual identity of being biracial. Being half man and half donkey, he embodies this idea of otherness. While these modern socially constructed stereotypes, such as the Mandingo or the Mambo, were not adopted until Reconstruction, audiences can start to see the making of these archetypes that were adopted by white supremacists. He is used as a form of comedic relief between the rude mechanicals, and this sort of moral perversion could only be recognized within the fairyland. This idea of a mixed relationship between Titania and Bottom is not one that would be accepted in the 1600s, such as we have been shown with Fluellen. Not only is this relationship seen as acceptable in the green world, but is actually representative of the ideals of oddity and the bestial that are perpetuated in the real world towards black men. Lastly, one of the more explicit plays about racial otherness and colonialism is The Tempest. Like Midsummer Night's Dream, The Tempest has been categorized as a comedy primarily, but it also deals with heavy themes such as tragedy, romance, and the use of mythical realism. The play follows Prospero, who is exiled and must stay with his daughter Miranda on an island for 12 years in order to regain his dukedom after conjuring his spiritual servant Ariel to wreck the ship carrying other European nobles back to Italy. The play closely follows the tensions between the two spirits, Ariel and Caliban, the son of a witch and half man, half monster, and their master Prospero and his crew. Is what we as modern audiences will probably name a quote noble savage. Caliban is not corrupted until he encounters Prospero. He says in Act 1, Scene 2 to Prospero, "You taught me language, and my profit on't is I know how to curse. The red plague rid you, for learning me your language." For Caliban, this language is the language of his oppressors, or his colonizers. Conversely, Prospero and Miranda's see it as giving him an opportunity to become educated. There are moments like these where Shakespeare attempts to give Caliban an empathetic ear. However, as a writer, he cannot escape implementing cultural biases, such as when he states that Caliban conspires to kill Prospero. Additionally, in both The Tempest and A Midsummer Night's Dream, audience are shown a fantastic world. Caliban discovering a god in the drunken Truculio reminds us, similarly, of Titania's worship of Bottom. Moreover, the interaction between Caliban and Prospero's daughter is one that closely resembles the tabooness of Titania and Bottom's relationship, and more significantly, points to the early makings of the Mandingo stereotype. A brutish black figure who is so uncivilized that due to the mistreatment by his master, that he rapes his daughter as an act of spite. Caliban is seen as a racial other for his mixed identity and plays into the fears of the foreign. His identity as a witch's son also plays into the idea that blackness can be equated to an innate sense of evil and malevolence that in some way, shape, or form will reveal itself. Ariel was, quote, rescued by Prospero and is fighting for their freedom. Ariel was found trapped in a cloven pine tree by Caliban's parent Sycorax. In return, Ariel promised to serve Prospero for a year, after which time he would give Ariel back their independence. Their story embodies a dynamic of colonial relationships that are shared between slave and master. While it is unclear of exactly how long they actually served Prospero, it is clear that the consciousness of Ariel and Prospero are intertwined, therefore neither is free from the other. Prospero is dependent on Ariel to look after him and use their magic for his purpose. while Prospero gives Ariel life and the opportunity to exercise their power. So, how might we address this issue of race when the words are never mentioned? More importantly, how should contemporary audiences and the theater deal with the Moors, the monsters, and the bastards? What can these stories teach us about race within the 20th century? Going back to my introduction, I wonder how these stories were so provoking for people within my community. Professor Francesca Royster states that much of the original reactions from African Americans about Shakespeare comes from a long line of original oral resuscitation, performance, and tradition. And this is ultimately due to imperialism. Citing James Baldwin, early on in his career as an author and a reader, he became, quote, bitterly anomalous that a black man should be forced to deal with the English language at all, forced to assault the English language in order to be able to speak. Especially because of the fact that Shakespeare's work was largely a part of not only Black America's education, but a part of our battle for literacy. Over time, Black people have had to associate worthiness to Shakespeare. Who can understand Shakespeare? Or, in other words, who can read something that the Western canon has deemed the quote, best literary figure? Throughout this essay, Baldwin finds that throughout these experiences that he learned reading, that Shakespeare was largely like all, quote, great poets, as he was able to tie in his own experiences with human feelings such as isolation. Learning the language of Shakespeare, he then goes on to say, quote, I think it is simply that he walked the streets and saw them and tried not to lie about what he saw, his public streets and his private streets. And I think that this is very true even today. Poets today can look around and now write about issues that concern us, such as neocolonialism, police brutality, mass incarceration, etc. One of the ways that people have envisioned Shakespeare's works to highlight individual pressing social issues is to adapt the play to focus on central themes of race. One of the most notable works being Aimé Césaire's revision or adaptation of Shakespeare's play, The Tempest. Rightfully named A Tempest, the play focuses on the experiences of Ariel, Caliban, and Prospero. The play combines post-colonialist theories to explore the archetype of the noble savage, and in order to do so, Césaire focuses in on the parallels between modern perceptions of racial identity and the victimhood of Black people. Moreover, the staging of the play is more diverse than past theater adaptations of The Tempest, and it combines some of the early workings during the 1900s that envisioned Prospero and Caliban as just monstrously evil. It simultaneously evokes that feeling of terror or that dredged up boogeyman that arises when Europeans envision racial others. The play paints into Caliban being more aware of his state of discontent as a victim of colonization and the ignorance of Prospero. In this adaptation, Prospero is a white slave master, Caliban is a black slave, and Ariel is described to be mulatto or mixed race. Overall, it emphasizes the wreckage that Europeans bring to African nations, such as the one that Caliban used to be a part of. Overall, works such as A Midsummer Night's Dream, Henry V, and The Tempest allow for us to engage in discourse about how our literacy and understanding of race is so intertwined. Across the boundaries of genres, his work allows for us to understanding the makings of our position identities. Thank you.